Hey y'all, it's me, Angela Walters from the Midnight Quilt Show. Thank you so much for joining me for this live Q&A. I'm going to answer your questions about the quilts from season 9 or really anything you want to talk about. So if you're watching, go ahead and leave them in the comments or the chat function and I'll answer them in just a second. But I want to show you the quilts that we've worked on the last couple videos. So first up, we saw the modern bursting star. And so here, beautiful, fun quilt. This one was a lot of fun because it was nice and mindless, just half square triangles, lots of fun. And here you can see just how much fun I had. The more basic the piecing, the more quilting I feel like I can get away with. And I feel like it's pretty safe to say I quilted that thing to death. So we saw that one, and then we had this beautiful one here. So love the colors, which is hilarious because I'm not such a pink person, but I do love this one, the Stardust one. So the pink and the green, and I got to use a little bit of green thread on that, so that was really cool. I'll be showing you some more of these up close. This next quilt you might have seen, the Quilter's Quandary, it's humongous, so I think I have the perfect bed in mind for this one. But it used this really cool block and a fun effect to create a complex looking quilt that was actually really easy. And you can see the block here. I'll give you a kind of a spoiler alert if you haven't already seen the episode. We have, the star and then a couple little half square triangles, and it makes this block look like it's floating. So really kind of fun. But I will say the part that almost got me was that intricate border with all the little bitty stars. So that was a lot of fun. I'm curious to know if anybody's tackled that one because I think I might want to do that one again in another color. All right, then we also saw Astro, where we got our ombre on with some pretty ombre fabrics. And I had a lot of fun with rulers with this one, doing some straight and curved. And there were some really great questions about this one, and I can't wait to share those with you in a second. And then the feathered star. So we had some big quilts. We had, not feathered star, feathered arrows. We had some big quilts. We had some little quilts, and this one was a lot of fun. So this one's going to be a perfect little wall hanging and a fun project. So let me show you how this one really shows off the fabric that we have here. So beautiful, beautiful fabric. And the best part, all these strips were made with jelly rolls or pre-cut strips. So really nice and a lot of fun. So like I said, go ahead and make sure you're posting your questions. I see some coming through for sure. But there was a great question about the feathered arrows that I want to point out. So Laura Todd said, it looks like you pressed all your seams to the dark side. If I had pressed them open, wouldn't they have nested better? And that may be the case. However, since I was using that white background, I knew if I pressed to the lighter side, I might see that purple fabric below and in the white. You might not notice it when you're piecing it, but when you get quilting, that's when you start to see those little pieces come up, and I definitely did not want that to happen. And if we look a little closer, we can see, that white fabric and, all the details it was adding. So a lot of fun there. Okay, Di Horton asked, in this particular one, love it, but Angela, help. How would you quilt a spool quilt? Oh, it's tricky without seeing it, but when you have a spool quilt, think about threads and lots of different colors and how fun that is. I would try a different design in each of the spools. Or you could almost get away with using a lot of different thread colors in each of those spools as well, since they're thread spools, I'm guessing. So kind of fun. So I'm interested to know if anybody has tried making this one because it's a free pattern and it's going to look really, really cool on your quilts, or really, really cool to work with. Plus, I got to work with that purple thread. So this is definitely a great one to try if you have, you're limited on quilting time, you want a quick, fun project, or you just want your quilting to show up because of all that beautiful fabric. Let's see the questions here. I saw one and then I lost it, but it was great. It was like, why is it important not to start and stop so much when you're quilting? And I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name, but I did see that. So here's the thing. My personality is such that I want to keep going. I don't want to stop, because if I stop, what could happen is I might get distracted, I might do something different, and so this is really going to gives me the ability to not have to worry about that. So it's funny because people in a class, I'll say, oh, you can go here, 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 here to not have to break thread. And people say, well, I would rather just break thread. So ultimately, it's up to you. Don't think that you have to do anything that I'm talking about because that's how I do it. That's just a personality thing that I like. I hate starting and stopping. Okay. Brenda says, let's hear about your rulers you mentioned in your last live stream. Good question. So those are some new rulers I'll have coming out soon, but not out yet. I can't tell you anything yet. Oh, App Lady 87, how do you fix holes in your quilt top? You know, I'm going to actually have a bonus video out about this in the future. I don't have one now though, so I do want to tell you about that. You can, carefully sew it up. You could put a little fusible underneath it, or I think a beautiful patch that's placed just quite right might be perfect. So it depends on how big the hole is and really what caused it. And so I know that's kind of a bummer when that happens. Okay, so now let's move on to the Astro quilt. Now, the thing about Astro quilt is I've used a lot of different ombres in the quilt, different colors. And what's fun about the ombres is that as the color changes, what happens, it kind of just makes this shimmer effect. You never know exactly where that's going to come out. And I know that for people that don't like to not know what the color is going to do, that could be a little scary. But for me, I love it. I love playing around with that. And a question that came out with on this particular quilt was, the pattern tells you exactly where to place the fabric colors, but does it tell you which fabric to buy? Now, this actually came as a kit. I'm not the best at picking fabric colors. Usually my quilts have about 3 pieces of fabric and that's it. However, kits that are already put together means I don't have to do any of the thinking. So this one already came with all the colors selected. Now, if you're talking about types of fabric, well, I'm definitely using Quilters cotton. I don't want anything too stretchy. I don't want anything too difficult to work with because then, it gets a little finicky with that. But what I did do on this quilt, I did have a lot of fun with the rulers. So I did something a little different. Instead of quilting each patch separately, I treated it as one all-over design, and I did some clamshells. And I actually did 2 rows of clamshells, and that gave me a beautiful orange peel. And then when I got to the more darker, cooler colors, I did some straight line quilting, and so that was a lot of fun. But I will tell you that there were a couple times that I ended up in the wrong place, and I was like, oh, I ended up here and I needed to be over there. So I just randomly added some little wishbones to add a little bit of texture, get me where I need to go. So if you find yourself getting stuck when you're using rulers, don't be afraid to throw in a little bit of that free motion quilting because it will help you get where you need to go. I'm going to go back and see if there's any other question. Oh, Gloria, have I tried any disappearing 9-patch patterns? I have, and those are a lot of fun because they do kind of disappear, but they go together so quickly. Really, the designs that I've picked for that, or the fabrics I would pick for that, depends on how much I want the individual pieces to show up. So that was, a lot of fun. Hello from Little Rock, Arkansas. Okay, so Megan's currently working on Bargello Beauty. She loves all the colors and the gorgeous design. Lots of fun. Bargellos are just great because they look more difficult than they are. And usually if you can just keep track of all your strips, you're gonna be okay. And so that's always a good deal. All right, let's see another question that came through about Astro that was really good. It said, it came through on the Astro video, but it said, what do you do with all the quilts that you make? Do you hang them up as well as use them on beds? How would you display a quilt? So I like to joke that if there was a contest on the person that had the most quilts in their house at any one given time, I'm pretty sure I'd win, or I'd at least be a contender, because my husband grew up with quilts, and so we have a lot of family quilts, plus through the Midnight Quilt Show, plus my own quilting, we have a lot of them. And so they go on the beds, they go on the couches, they go on a ladder. So to display them in the house, I use a ladder. So it's a beautiful ladder that goes in the corner, and I can hang the quilts over it and kind of rotate through them there. But most of the Midnight Quilt Show quilts actually travel with me when I do trunk shows and classes, and so it's a lot of fun for them to see them up close. So that's what happens with some of those, a lot of fun. One last question on the Astro bit, and then we'll move on to the next quilt. Shelly left this on the video. I see you used a ruler to do your free motion quilting, which I did, used a couple. Can these rulers be used on a low shank domestic machine? Now, that's the #1 question, right? Like the low shank, the rulers that I'm using, they're 1/4 inch high, so they're thicker than your regular rulers. And so if you have a low shank machine, you can't use those particular ones. However, they do make rulers that are applicable for low shank machines. So just because you have a machine with a lower shank, and that just means your foot's a little closer to the bottom of the machine, there's still rulers that you can use. So don't let that discourage you from trying it. All right, so now let's talk about Quilter's Quandary and the beautiful stars and the fun things there. So what I really loved about this quilt was that you got really good at making stars as you went. I mean, that was just star after star after star. But Kathy said she loves the quilt, however, she's not a gray fan. What other background fabric would look good other than black, but still have the same effect? Did I say I love this quilt? So I am a gray fan. I love gray. I think it's the perfect neutral, but I think it depends on the color of your stars, right? You want enough difference, enough pop in those colors because you don't want to lose that effect that you're spending so long to put together. So if we look back at the quilt, the two colors I pick should, I think, they don't have to be the same exact color, like both grays or both one color, but I do want to make sure that these two are different enough from the stars because I don't want to take all that effort into the stars just to have it disappear. So if I had to pick, I think maybe a blue, like a navy, a darker blue would be really pretty, or maybe even like a darker purple, and I can't believe I'm saying that because we know I'm not always a fan of purple, but that would be cool too. All right, so now I'm going to come back to the questions on the YouTube, and somebody said, Julia, do you piece backing? So that's kind of the joke around, around my house, just me. I'm the only one that laughs at my jokes. But the thing is, when I get done piecing the quilt top, I don't usually want to piece the backing. So I try as much as I can to use extra wide backing fabric. That way I just don't have to piece it. But sometimes you have to, and the whole time I'm thinking, oh, I could be quilting. It's just one of those necessary things. But if I do piece my backing, I use a 1/2-inch seam and I try to press that seam open so that it's not bulky. What gets me in trouble though is when I have multiple blocks and seams going every different direction. It can make it a little bit bumpier as I'm quilting, but it can definitely be done. Okay, so I have Beth says she has a medium westerly ruler. Will your rulers work high or low? So mine uses for high shank. All right. Oh, Judith said she'd love to see me teach at San Diego. I would love to be at San Diego right now because it's not super nice here in Missouri. But anyway. Okay, so a question about the Quilters quandary also came up from Brenda Davis. Brenda said, I've noticed when you make a quilt on the Midnight Quilt Show, it's mostly with solid fabric, solid fat quarters. Any reason for that besides my quilting? Well, I got to tell you, one of my favorite things about solid fabrics is that you can see the quilting on the front of the quilt. But that being aside, it's a lot easier to pull those from your stash. It's a lot easier that you're not getting kind of tied into the fabric. So let me explain what I mean. If somebody comes into my quilt shop and they look at a quilt and they're like, oh, I don't like that print, sometimes that will dissuade them from the whole pattern. So at least with a solid, you can look at it and say, oh, maybe I could use a green print or a lighter green print. And so that's why we like using the solids. Plus, again, the quilting shows up. So that's my favorite part. And I know that when you're watching the videos, sometimes you want to be able to see what's going on with that. So a lot of fun. All right, so say goodbye to Quilters Quandary. We're going to put that thing over here. A lot of fun. And then we're going to go back to our Stardust quilt. So the Stardust quilt, let's check this out. It uses these pieced strips, and the block is actually made in sections. And so in the very center of it is this beautiful star. So it's kind of like a Lone Star block, except it kind of breaks into fragments and you have other elements and a ton of background negative space. Let's see if I can pull it out here. I mean, look at all that beautiful space. It was like playtime when I was quilting this one. So there were a couple questions about this particular one. So let's see what came up with that. I love this one. Okay, Wendy had a question that comes up a lot. And her question was, what's my favorite kind of wine? Oh, wait, no, that's not her question. Do I switch bobbins when I switch the top thread? And she wanted to make sure the pattern is included with the kit. So question 2, Wendy, the pattern is included with the kit, so you do get that. And second of all, the first question, I do match my thread color on the back to the one on the top for the most part. If it's close, like let's say I'm switching between like different shades of green, I can just keep the same one on the bottom. But when I get in trouble is when I have like a black thread on top and a white thread on the back, and I think, oh, it's going to be perfect, right? Well, you know what happens. I get those little pokies or those little areas where the bobbin thread shows up to the top or the top thread shows up. And so just to save myself the headache, I use the same thread color. Now, that does mean that I have to switch bobbins as I go, but I'm fine with that. Of course, it completely depends on your preference, so you don't have to do that at all. Okay, Kobe asked, they want to know the finished size, and they're wanting to do this with purples. Now, this would look pretty cool, different shades of purple. I think that'd be awesome. So this quilt's actually 90 inches square. It's queen size, which is perfect for the size that you're saying you're needed. And if you need to enlarge it, since there's so much negative space along the edges, you can just add more borders and make it a lot bigger. That's what I love about borders, just make the quilt bigger, bigger, and bigger. But Rachel had a question, which I thought was really good. Her question was, can you use a jelly roll or those pre-cut strips to make that shape. And actually you can't, they're actually wider than they look. So you can't use a pre-cut strip for that, unfortunately, but still lots of fun. You'll get a lot of practice cutting strips if you're making this one. And then another last question from M. Adams, and then we'll check over and see what people are asking over here, is how do I secure the stitches? So if you're talking about the quilting stitches, I usually pull the bobbin thread up to the top. I take a couple stitches in place, and then I just go to town quilting away, and then trim those tails after I've quilted away from them. However, some people like to take those little thread tails and tie them and bury them, and you can do that as well. So that's just kind of how I go about it. Let's see. How can you tell good fabric from bad fabric? I don't want to spend all that time to make a quilt for it only to last a couple of years. So Debbie, that's a good question, and usually you can tell by the feel of it. I mean, think about if you're going to be sleeping with this quilt and you're going to be cuddling with it, you want it to be comfortable, right? What you don't want is to not have it feel good. So your fingers are the best indicator, and if the fabric feels good, it's probably going to be good to use. Another indicator is if it's too good to be true, it probably isn't. So if it's a really, really cheap price, maybe that could be why. But what's weird though is if you're quilting, you don't want to use like a super fine fabric. So some people will use sheets, right? They'll say, oh, I want to put sheets on the back of my quilt because it's cheaper or it's easier, but sheets can have a higher thread count and it can actually make it harder to quilt with. So the best thing is to let your fingers be your guide, and the quilt's going to last. I mean, if you quilt it and you love it, it's going to be fine. So try not to worry too much about that. Easy for me to say, right? Joy, would I ever do a show in Oregon? Well, I'm going to be in Oregon next week. I'm going to be at Heartbeat Quilting in Spokane, so I'm excited about that. All right, I love these questions. Honestly, I love seeing where everybody's from because I think that's what's great. It's kind of like quilters from everywhere. Hi from Brazil. Yeah, let's go to Brazil. I think that sounds amazing for sure. So let's talk about April's question. Is there a beginner free motion that would look like ocean waves or remind you of a shark? Asking for a friend. The friend is my 4-year-old demanding that I ask. First of all, adorable. I love that. Second of all, I've never quilted sharks before, and I feel like this is a missed opportunity. I probably should have done this up to the point. For your waves, you could just do a nice wavy line, but then every once in a while, just add a little shark fin. I think that would be pretty fun. That's about all I got for that. The reason I would do a shark fin is it's easier than quilting a whole shark. But if your 4-year-old is really wanting a shark, you can have him draw you some out, and then you can kind of place them on there, mark them on there and quilt them. That would be really cool. He might like that too. All right, Spokane is in Washington. You're right, Joy. Sorry, haha. That is right. Spokane, Washington, Oregon. I was actually born in Oregon, so I probably won't be in Oregon very soon, unfortunately. Okay, so sticking with the quiltings, let's go to the Modern Bursting Star. Loved this one. So this particular one uses those half square triangles and all the beautiful shapes. And what's fun is you can't really get an idea of this pattern in the picture here because it just keeps growing and growing and radiating from there. So it makes these big rows and makes some really, really cool secondary effect. And what's nice is that it's all done with those half square triangles. It's like the best block to learn because you can do so much with it. But on this video, there was a good question which made me realize that sometimes I kind of breeze through things without assuming that you might have questions. B. Cobbler said, I found your videos and I'm hooked. The thing I find confusing is the quilting language for pre-cut material. What's a charm pack? What's a fat quarter? Yes, so one of the best things that came out of quilting, well, quilters will tell you this for sure, is the pre-cut fabrics because you get all these beautiful fabrics already cut for you. So all you have to do is start sewing. It makes it very handy and very easy to kind of work through. So real quick, let's talk about some of the pre-cuts. So you might see something like this. This is pre-cut strips. They're 2.5 inches. And sometimes you hear it called a jelly roll because it looks kind of like a jelly roll. But what's nice about that is it's not only already cut in those strips, but you get a little taste of all the fabrics in the collection. So that's really nice. So that's what a jelly roll strip would look like. Then you also have your charm packs, and those are just 5-inch pre-cut squares. Again, a really good versatile size. And the size of those, as far as how many pieces you get in each of those little things, really depends on the manufacturer. So that kind of that's different from place to place, but still really cool to work with. Sally was getting behind me. She loves the idea of having the baby draw his sharks. I love that. Ooh, sassy ones from Kansas City. Hey, I'm just here in Liberty. That's so fun. All right, Tabitha Harris, do you teach classes at your shop? I live really close. I do. Natalie, who forgives me for not saying that Spokane was in Oregon, says, when will I be at Heartbeat Quilting next week? I can't think of the day off the top of my head, but you know. Hello from Malaysia and Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Christy says, will I ever come to Scotland? Yes, I'm coming right now. I'll be there in just a minute. Okay, obviously I'm joking. Let's see. How does one learn free motion quilting? This is from Michelle, and this was on the Modern Bursting Star. How does one learn free motion quilting if their machine, manufactured in 1987, does not have the ability to lower the feed dogs and there are no cover plates? So what you could do is just cover that thing up. You can put a Supreme slider over it, and a Supreme slider is a Teflon kind of smooth thing that kind of lets the quilt flow, but it also covers up those feed dogs. Or even if you have index cards, you can tape those down. Basically, you just need to cover them up so that they're not pulling the quilt when you're trying to quilt. So you can do it. I started quilting with my grandpa's, well, my husband's grandpa's old Bernina. It was like made in the 70s, and I still did stuff with it. So don't worry, you can definitely do it. All right, so another question from Mary Avalis was, when I use my sewing machine at home, how high do I turn the speed up? Well, here's the thing. I like to quilt fast. I like to quilt fast so I can kind of get this thing done and have fun with it. So I'm not sure of the speed. I just know the pedal is all the way down. However, that's different for everybody, and it's different depending on the design that you're working with. So if I'm doing an intricate design, little bitty bits, I'm going to slow down a little bit. Or if I'm doing really long wavy lines, I'm going to go longer and faster. So it depends on the design, depends on the time of day, depends on how much water I've had or wine. So it kind of changes. But I tell you what I don't worry about is the stitch length. So that stitch length is going to change as I'm quilting because I'm working in manual, which means the machine is just going the same speed. I'm determining the stitch length by how I move my hands. So, you know, try not to get too frustrated for that. Western Australia, a huge fan of anything Angela. That's awesome. Oh, another Australian asked a question. Do I ever unpick? Hi from Australia. So unstitching, right? Unquilting is always not fun because it takes 2 seconds to put in, but 20 minutes to take out is pretty much the ratio of that. I do unpick from time to time. Now, my criteria for ripping out quilting is there's something wrong with the stitch construction, right? The tension is off. It's not going to hold that stitch. It doesn't look good. I'll definitely rip that out because that's going to affect the integrity of the quilting later on. But I'll also take it out if it's a part of a secondary pattern and it's really obvious that that's a mistake. Or I can't justify and say I meant to do it. So sometimes I make a mistake and I'm like, oh, well, we'll just say that's a design element. Sometimes I can't get away with that, and so I will unpick it. I try not to do it very often, and I definitely try not to do it, if at all possible. However, I know that when I was starting out as a newer quilter, I would quilt something and I would get frustrated because it didn't look like I thought it should look, and I would take it out. And so if you absolutely can't live with it, then fine. But don't think that by ripping it out and ripping it out and ripping it out, it's going to make you a better quilter. Learning how to handle those mistakes and continue on usually will do the trick. Sally said, started watching your videos when I saw the picture of you holding a glass of wine. It's just kind of like, the house is quiet. I like my wine. It's a lot of fun. So I think we're kindred spirits there. This is a good one. Oh, Ariana, would I rather use brown binding on a colorful quilt or colorful binding on a brown quilt? That's a good question. I'm going to say brown binding on a colorful quilt because I'm not a huge fan of brown. So there's that. I do like that. Would you rather? I kind of like that. What machine do you recommend for beginner quilters? I'm not going to be in California anytime soon, Laura Lou. So sorry. But when it comes to the machine to use, it's the machine that you have. So if you already have a sewing machine, just use it. It's going to be fine. But if you're looking to invest in one or get a bigger one, look for something that's going to fulfill the purposes that you need. So for instance, if you're not going to embroider, you don't need the fancy stitches, then don't pay for those. You don't need them. If you're going to be doing machine quilting, because it is the funnest part, then look for something that has a little bit wider throat if possible. But I do want to say that you can do the designs on any size machine. I taught a class, I was over in France, we had a little bitty throat space, and we all quilted the variable star quilt, and it was fine. So try not to get too frustrated. Barb, is Chloe making an appearance soon, or will your little one make her appearance? You know, she probably will. She is just like her mommy in every way. So I can see her. I'm surprised she hasn't figured out how to take over my feed and take over my stuff. So a lot of fun. Let's see. How do I adjust the top tension for embroidery on my Dream Machine 2? Kimberly Fowler. I have no idea. I'm so sorry. But adjusting the tension will be important because if you want to make sure you have that good stitch length with that. Oh, Dana, how do I pick thread color? This is good. For a quilt that has lots of colors. Okay, so if there is a quilt that I'm working on, has lots of different colors, but I'm not going to change thread for each of them. For instance, I'm doing a design that goes over that, or I just don't have time, which sometimes is the case. What I'm gonna do is I like to look for a thread, like a neutral color that's in the value of the quilt. So if the whole quilt is a lot of medium values, maybe some dark, then I'll look for a medium neutral, like tan or yellow or gray. Something that's gonna look good on most of the fabrics. If I'm not sure, I have two different thread colors, I'm not sure which one to err on, I'm gonna go with the lighter one because I think lighter thread looks better on dark fabric than vice versa. So addition a few colors out so you can lay out a few colors on your quilt, see which one you think looks best and go for it. Now I do have a bonus video on how to pick threads because that's one of the things I love to do. I may not be good picking out fabrics for quilts, but I'm good about picking threads. A lot of experience with it. So you can check that out. I'm sure we'll get that linked in the description box and it kind of gives you some of that same idea. So let's see, Joy said, a finished quilt is better than a perfect quilt top. Absolutely. Jay Campbell, do I use a stitch regulator? I don't. So the benefit of a stitch regulator is that it keeps all the stitches the same size no matter how fast you go. So it speeds up and slows it down with you. However, I didn't have one on my machine when I learned, so I kind of learned without it. I'm totally fine not quilting with it, but that means all my stitches aren't the same size, and I'm okay with that. If you want them all to be the same size, then definitely use a stitch regulator. I will say that now, when I quilt with machines that have a stitch regulator, whether it's a sit down or stand up, it takes me a second to get used to the sound of the machine going faster and slower. It's just kind of like there's something about that sound that's a little jarring to me. I like to get that same sound, that same motion going and have a good time with it. So a lot of fun. So Shanna says she's about to start the grotto quilt. Wish her luck. You're having trouble seeing what you've quilted in print fabric with a matching thread. Any tips? Okay, so the good thing is if you're quilting with a matching thread color, you're not going to see any mistakes. So there's the positive. Love that. But it also means you can't see where you're going. So what will help you is if you have the ability to turn off your light on your machine, but still leave your machine on, go ahead and do that. If you're on your sewing machine and you can't, just put some tape over it and then get a light from the side. So put a lamp kind of close to you, open a window, and that side light is gonna make a little bit of a shadow and that will give you just enough a hint to see where you've been. And so that's usually the best thing to do with that. Ariana, you're so funny. I hope I'm saying it right. Addison said, Ange, can you look at doing a modified bear claw quilt? We have done one that's not a modified one, but it's a fun bear paw design. But I've seen some really cool stuff where there's multiple bear claws. We might have to try that sometime. Okay, let's see. But gosh, 30 minutes just flies by when you're having a lot of fun. David said, how can I work around machine quilting without a quilting table or the attachment to my machine, right? So you're like, okay, I want to do it, but it's just not working. Pick designs that go vertically so that you can work this way. Even without a table, even without the attachment, you'll still be fine. Especially if it's a smaller throated machine because you kind of run out of space this way. And so I'm always thinking, what's vertical? Because I can use my whole body momentum and I can push that whole thing when I'm going. Karen, do I listen to podcasts or music when I quilt? I listen to both, actually. Sometimes podcasts if I'm feeling, like I need to be intellectually fed, or music when it's just late and I need to stay up and get it done. Clementine, okay, one more question and then I'll land this plane. But Clementine, this is good. This is a good question. Given your experience, what is a quilting challenge for you? Quilting challenge for me, I don't know if you mean piecing or quilting. Piecing would be anything that's more complex than a half square triangle, or anything that's really big, because I kind of lose interest pretty easy. But machine quilting What really challenges me or gets me nervous, right, kind of makes me nervous at night, is when it's something like a hand applique quilt, because that took a lot of time, and I know I can't replicate that. So this sounds kind of bad, but when I'm quilting a quilt for a customer like I did back in the day, I would look at a quilt and be like, okay, if I mess it up, worst case scenario, I can remake it. But if I'm working on a quilt of hand applique little berries and stuff, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna have to enter the witness protection program because I can't remake that if I mess it up. So definitely hand applique always makes me a little nervous. I did a whole exhibit for Quilt Festival a few years back with big, beautiful hand applique quilts, and it was like 4 of them, and I think that just, gave me a lot of stress. So kind of crazy. Oh, I know I said one more question, but this one's a good one. David said, how often do I see Jenny from Missouri Star? So I live only 45 minutes from her, and my town is the biggest town that's close to her. So I've actually ran into her at Walmart before, and I've seen her truck with her face on it outside my local shopping mart. So I'm just saying, we run into each other, not like all the time, but definitely enough to be like, oh, hey, Jenny, how's it going? She is a sweetheart. And good luck, Gerald, with the Dresden Sunflower Quilt. Lots of fun. All right, so I know it's went by and there's so many questions I didn't get a chance to answer, but thank you so much. I'm looking forward to new episodes of the Midnight Quilt Show coming in May. I know that means we've got a couple weeks until then, but you can always go back and make some of the fun quilts that we've seen here. And I can't wait to show you some fun stuff that we're working on, including a t-shirt quilt. That's right, I'm gonna do a t-shirt quilt, doing a wall hanging, a modern art piece, and a lot of other fun stuff. So I can't wait to show you what I'm up to there. So thank you so much and happy quilting.